Well, this is the Rebel's Edge, folks. It might look a little different. That's because our friend Tom Gronkowski, Gronk's little brother,
Gronk
is running it instead of Jared. And Jared, we're rooting for you and your wife. We hope everything comes out okay. We don't know a lot more than that, folks, but Jared usually does, 99% of the video stuff here. And Gronk was great enough to step in here, and we really appreciate it, Tom. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gronk.
And we won't have, the subjects running down the side like we normally have, folks. We apologize for that. Hopefully we'll get that stuff back pretty quick. And again, a lot of it depends on our friend Jared and how quickly his wife gets better. So prayers up for that. Yeah. All right, Pete, let's dive into the macro minute, shall we?
Let's do it.
I'm going to say it's tomorrow's August Consumer Price Index, or CPI, as well as Thursday's interest rate decision by the ECB. Now, we have a whole day tomorrow to talk about both of those two things, Pete, but that's the macro that I'm looking at today.
I'm going to go a really odd macro for you, John. You and I talk about energy all the time. We always focus right there on crude, right? How about uranium? Now, we have seen hits constantly over the last few weeks in URA, which is the ETF, but also we've even seen some option paper in CCJ. Well, here's the deal. 52-week highs getting hit today in CCJ. Why is that? Because uranium continues to kind of stair step a little bit higher as well. So it's something we don't talk about very much, but it certainly is macro. And obviously nuclear energy is something that it can be very clean, but there's also the risks that come along with it. But there is not enough of it right now.
Absolutely. And Pete, middle of August, so about August 15th or thereabouts, CCJ Camco is $34. Today it's almost 39.
Yep.
And obviously there's a small number of people, of businesses that are going after this. It's not quite the same as some of the other metals and things like that we might talk about that people mine. Yeah. So just kind of giving everybody an update on that. All right. How about, Pete, crude oil? Crude oil explodes higher. And this one is taking the elevator up, Pete. It ain't taking the stairs up. Every day, it seems, crude oil is moving higher and higher and higher. Today, it's through $89 a barrel. Again, we could have been refilling the spur when it was 67 just 2 months ago, Pete.
Yep. And we had a chance to do that, John. I'm still angry with all the folks in Washington who didn't figure this whole thing out. When you've got OPEC doing a huge cutback, right? 1 million barrels and another 1 million barrels, and now the Russians have joined. But it took all the way until we got into the early part of July for this to start kicking in. We were still 68, 70. Next thing you know, we start going up 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and here we are now. I will not be shocked if we're in the 90s in the very near future. I know that's only $1 or 2 away, but given the big run, I think we still get there. John, I'm going to give you for the fantastic futures real quick. The 2-year now above 5%. The 10-year approaching that 4.3 area again, pushing against that. That is why when you look at the NASDAQ, you see those stocks getting hit pretty hard today. At least that's one more reason, because folks are looking at those numbers saying, you know what? I'll take that 5% yield. Let me get after that son of a gun. And I think that's something we all got to focus on.
Agreed. Well, next we always cover 4 stocks, folks. And we've got 4 that are pretty interesting today because Larry Ellison, whenever he's in the news, it's interesting. Yeah. And Oracle is the company that he founded. It's down hard today. Disappointing guidance. And his guidance was meant to be bullish, Pete. The guidance he gave talked about AI development, talked about 4 billion of capacity for their Gen 2 cloud and so forth. That's all bullish. But the problem is that their growth forecasts were not as bullish. And that's why the stocks boom, boom, boom to the downside.
Yeah, down about 13%, John. I mean, it's getting hit. But let's also go back and say, you know what? This is a stock that had a really great run year to date. I mean, it's been absolutely flying to the upside, not far off 52-week highs. And now it's been pulling back a little bit. And obviously today, 13%, that's not just a little, that's a lot. But the outlook being below the estimates, John, you and I talk about it every time we look at these earnings. We look through, we go through all the different stuff. If you say that, you generally are going to get hit, and they are getting hit. Their numbers were pretty good. I mean, the earnings were up, what, 16% year over year. That was pretty solid. The revenue was actually up as well, just a little bit, 9% year over year. So they had some very big positives, but we were always looking forward. And when you look forward and they start cutting that back a little bit, they're going to start turning and selling, especially on a stock that's made a run. And this is one of those stocks.
Yeah. And obviously one of the big tech leaders too, Pete.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't talk about them for AI or their cloud, and they're big in both.
Huge.
Let's talk about another company that sooner or later we're going to be talking about for their AI, Pete. That's Apple, because they have their event today. It's going to be the Apple iPhone 15. If you can believe that, folks, 15 different iterations, at least, of the iPhone so far. Wedbush, Dan Ives, says that about 1.2 billion installed base, and about 25% of those have been holding those phones for 4 years or more. We all know why. It's expensive. You know, it's like a computer. It is a computer in your hand. The issues are China, and how much is the China ban of Apple products going to negatively impact them? Because it is negative. And you know, Morgan Stanley saying that, hey, maybe it's overdone, that big sell-off last week. What's your feeling, Pete?
You know, it could be a little overdone, John, but when you look out there and you see global smartphone shipments down 9% in the last quarter, that's something that's got to be a little bit concerning. I know that talking to some people about Apple and what they're doing with the phones and everything, I have heard that they actually are giving you an obscene amount for your old phone when you bring that in, because they want you to bring that in to get to the new phone. So that could make things kind of interesting as well. I think you bring up the most important point, though, John, China. That is an issue because that is a growth spot. We talk about it with Nike. We talk about it with Starbucks and a lot of different other companies. And when you're looking to China and that's your growth engine of the future, and the problem is they're not really all that excited about us right now. And because of that, that turns into something that could get a little bit ugly. So it'll be interesting to see how this launch really goes on the 15. Every one of their launches is the same, though, John. You've got more power. You've got more time. You've got more this. You've got more that. The phone is better and everything else. And they try to suck you in. I got to tell you something. I don't see why I need to go from my 13 to the 15 right now. And I say that as a guy who loves Apple and the stock and all the things that Tim Cook and everybody have done for a really long period of time. But I don't see why I need to turn in my phone just yet. So if other people are like me, maybe the stock is fairly priced, actually.
Yeah, I don't think it's just that 6% sell-off last week, which was, of course, mainly based on China and what they were doing. I think it's that, like Pete said, what's the real reason? Well, 48 megapixel camera. Well, okay. I don't know if I need all those megapixels. I have them, by the way, because I have the iPhone 14 Pro Max. That was the last phone that had it. Now they're putting it on all their stuff, Pete, to try to get that little incremental move. I agree with you. I don't think this one just gets up and turns and burns to the upside, but I still think services and all the rest are going to be great.
Yeah.
All right. Now we talk about one of Pete's favorite stocks, Casey's General Store, of all things. They're up double digits today. And why? Well, they earned $4.52 a share versus $3.36. So that's a nice beat. Revenue came in above estimates, and they affirmed 2024 same-store sales. All those are good things. And Pete, by the way, a lot of those Casey's, I'm not sure about all of them, but a lot of them have gasoline as well, which draws people into those convenience sort of stores. And they've got a ton of them. They've got like 2,300 of them out there.
2,300. They bought out Buc-ee's. I think it's 580 million, John. That was a Omaha, Nebraska based company, very similar. They're so big and they're so strong. They just said, you know what? We're going to take you guys out too. Let's bring you in. And John, same store sales up 5.2% is where they've risen up to. They were looking at around 4%. Now they're looking at 5.2%. So These guys are killing on all ends, whether it's the gasoline side or that great breakfast pizza that I love when I go over there and I'm driving around. I did a hit just a couple of years ago standing in front of one of these Casey's. Stock was about 160 at the time. I was getting laughed at by the clowns who sit around that little funny table on a show that comes on at noon. I got laughed at by those guys. I'm not sure who's laughing now as the stock's hitting another 52-week and all-time high. I think it got over almost 270 today, John. It got very close, if not. So
It did.
it's on a run. It's absolutely sprinting. They're doing the right things. And I'll tell you, they are focusing and making sure that you come inside there to get that food, to get that drink. And when you see everything that they are selling, it's absolutely amazing. They do a great job. They compete with Quick Trip and all the other biggies out there. These guys are huge, though. 2,300 stores. That's a nice chunk.
Yeah, certainly is, Pete.
Yeah.
And you know, apparently people are very loyal. It's very sticky.
Yep.
And they're very loyal.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit, Pete, about AMPH, because this one, it's one of those that makes you say, because they're doing a $300 million stock offering. All right. Well, they just really announced that they intend to offer $300 million, not 300 million shares, $300 million worth of their shares. And that the people who buy those will have an option or a warrant, whatever you want to call it, Pete, for another 45 million. That's what's known as dilution, folks. You're diluting the shares. Doesn't mean that's a bad thing. I mean, companies they go to the public markets to get the capital that they need. So if they need this to grow, if they need this to get through clinical trials or whatever, like pharma companies do, well, okay, we understand. Still going to get hit in the short term. But guess what, Pete? One of their people, an insider, a CFO, sold a ton of stock just before this happened.
Yeah, that's never good. You know, but sticking with this number that you're talking about, the 300 million and all that stuff, and I don't like what you're telling us about that selling, but I would say this, looking at the company and what they do and where they are in this kind of biopharmaceutical world that they're in, John, they trade 22 times earnings. You look at the balance sheet, it looks pretty daggone pristine. Everything looks great to me. It's down 10% today. It could be creating an opportunity. Now, the frustration would be what you were just talking about, an insider making that kind of a sale. But these guys are leadership, John, in the injectables, the intranasal, the inhalation, and all those types of things. They literally go for the most difficult area to go to attack to be where they are. And because of that, they don't have a lot of competition, which is generally a pretty good thing. So I kind of like what I'm seeing here at 22 times forward earnings and a PE. They got some great free cash flow. They've got a lot of positives that I'm looking at as well. So down on, 10% or whatever it is today, that might be not a bad buy. The only concern that I'd have is that insider buying ahead of this whole thing or selling ahead of this whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And they said it was part of a regularly scheduled. They always put that
could be. It could
I'm
be.
putting it in air quotes. Regularly scheduled, move. Okay, but it still smells bad.
It smells bad.
And I'm sure this is probably nothing, but nonetheless, it makes you kind of scratch your head. All right, Pete, I know you want to talk about my Colorado Buffalo. So,
oh, good Lord. Let me tell you something. This Kool-Aid that people are drinking, not you necessarily, but you might be in that category. You might be. Let me just calm down the Kool-Aid just for a second here. And here's what I'll tell you. I said there were going to be two upsets over the weekend. One was Kansas City is going to get beat by Detroit. They did. The second, Colorado might get beat by Nebraska. Now, in the first half, I think Colorado was shaking like a you-know-what, you-know-where. So they were in a little bit of a spot. Then they started to blow it open in the second half and did a great job. But John, how about this? Against Nebraska, they gave up 220 yards on the ground. Nebraska again, and here's what's killing that team. That's a pretty good football team, actually. They had 4 turnovers again, 2 weeks in a row. 2 games, they've got 8 turnovers. So when you look at that, and John, a lot of the time you say, well, but it was a forced turnover. These weren't forced turnovers. One of them was the center snapping it into a guy who's coming in motion across. I mean, it was absolutely everything wrong that could happen. And the stupidity of the Nebraska coaching staff, They were running on him, John, but for some reason they kept wanting to throw the ball. And you're just sitting there watching going, why wouldn't you take what you're getting? When you're getting 6 and 7 yards per carry, why wouldn't you just run until they prove that they can stop you, right? I mean, you and I are smart enough linebackers to know that, but I do give a lot of props to Dion. He's got those guys fired up. He's got the fan base fired up. He's got all the rappers and all the guys that are flying in on private jets wrapped up. They got Oregon. They got USC. They start going through those guys, John. Then I'll start to think, well, maybe they got something. But so far, they beat a team that had 4 returning starters at TCU and a Nebraska team that I'm not sure too many people thought were going to the national title game they just played in last week and lost to Colorado. But interesting. How about Texas? Crowd them. But I think the best games of the weekend, John, were Texas, Alabama. We got to see yours. This kid is amazing. He's a transfer from Ohio State, and he is absolutely lighting it up. They go into Tuscaloosa. He throws for, I don't know, 350 yards or something against Bama, John. People just don't do that. And the Bama quarterback, he gave up the ball a little bit. And then you got Ole Miss going to your Tulane. And Ole Miss in the fourth quarter had to pull their heads out just to get up and get that victory because Tulane was putting it to them. But it was 27-3 at half. And, you look at some of these scoring, there was just some great scoring by Ole Miss in the second half that really got them back in the game and then to win the game. But Tulane's pretty daggone good, John. I like what you're doing. What do you think, though? Is Bama done like everybody's saying, or is Bama – they just had a bad game against a really good football team in Texas?
Yeah, they did. Both those two things, Pete.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't write them off yet. I don't think any of those coaches, Lane Kiffin or any of the coaches in the SEC are writing off Bama. That's one that you circle on the calendar and all the kids are thinking about it, weeks ahead of that game. So no, I don't think Bama's done. Did Texas show you their weaknesses? Yes, they did. And did Texas show their strengths as well? And Matthew McConaughey dancing on the field, that's not one of their strengths. But,
hey, wait a minute. When those rappers all go to Colorado, it's okay, but Matthew McConaughey can't do it.
I don't know if either McConaughey or Stephen A. Smith or the rappers or Michael Irvin or any of these guys, other than Warren Sapp. When Warren Sapp's out there on the field for Colorado, okay, props to Warren Sapp. But that Ole Miss Tulane, Pete. Tulane showed you that beating USC last year was no fluke. That is a very good football team. And, I think that Texas is very lucky to have Ewers there, even though Peyton's son, one of the Peyton brothers' son, is the backup down there in Texas.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, think how deep they are, John, and the talent at Texas. Everybody's like, oh, they got to go to Tuscaloosa. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And I think Bama's great. And I love that coach. I think he's been awesome. I mean, I go back to the days when Nick Saban, he used to coach at Michigan State, people. Mm-hmm. This isn't like he's been at Bama for 30 years or anything like that. But he's a great coach, and he's been a great coach everywhere he's been, at Michigan State, at LSU. I know he didn't do well in the pro game, but that's a different game for everybody. And you know what? Not very many coaches can do both and have success. Speaking of the pro game, John, how about this? Who was the best looking team in week 1? And what was the best game in week 1? What do you think? Let's see if we match up. I got the 49ers for who looked the best.
They look like the strongest team, Pete. But I'll say this, and I know we'll talk briefly about Aaron Rodgers, but Love looked pretty damn comfortable for the Green Bay Packers.
Yep.
And they kicked my Bears up and down the field. That wasn't even a game. The Packers just crushed us. Mm-hmm. And so as far as a team that a lot of us didn't pick to do all that well, probably because we hadn't seen Love play much, Pete, because until this injury from Rodgers, he doesn't get a lot of those injuries, that is. He's had a very great injury-free career for the most part, but Love is the real deal. And to your point, Purdy looked fantastic, looked confident, didn't have any problem moving around. And I think San Francisco's lucky to have him.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, McCaffrey is the best football player, maybe in the NFL. I mean, what he does at every position, John, running, blocking, passing, catching, the guy is unreal. I mean, he really is like a video game, which kind of kicks me into the next one, Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
I don't know if I've seen a guy put up those kind of numbers other than on a video game, John. I mean, that was a great game. Chargers, Dolphins, that was the game of the weekend for me because Tua throws for 466. I don't remember the last time a quarterback threw for those kind of numbers, John, but when Tyreek Hill gets 11 catches for 215 and 2 touchdowns, 215 yards. I mean, that little son of a gun can scoot like I've never seen. They've got a bunch of receivers who can run. Tua can throw the ball pretty well. What a fun game that was, because there was a lot of duds out there. But you know what? There were some games where you really stood up and went, holy smokes. And what they did there, and let's not discount the Chargers either. I mean, Herbert is a great quarterback. They actually had their success running the football, John. I think they ran for like 200 and some odd yards. So different styles, and they got caught. They got lost, I think, by 4 points or something like that. But that was a great game on the road out there in Miami.
Yeah. Well, what about Aaron Rodgers now, Pete? You know, all this hype. And it's not like he came in and threw 6 interceptions.
No.
He came in and went out basically in the first series, Pete.
4 plays, John. I think it was on the 4th play. And, you know, the sad thing about it is this really was a great story, right? Whether he falls on his face or, you know, then it's a great story for the haters. If he throws 4 touchdowns in game 1, God, the haters are dying, and the guys who love him are all just sitting there going like this. And they're playing against the Buffalo Bills, a pretty damn good football team normally. Although I got to tell you, there was too many interceptions last night. I mean, they gotta figure things out a little bit, but that's the best defense in football. The Jets are the best defense in football. They really are. I mean, those corners, that defensive line, even the linebackers, John. I mean, they are something pretty daggone special in New York right now. But Aaron gets that play, and man, when they showed it back and they showed that tweak in his calf that was basically when it snapped or whatever, as far as his Achilles and all that, that's really a shame. And he is now officially out for the season. So they got to go back to their first round draft pick from a year or two ago. But man, what a sad ending to this whole thing, as far as the hard knocks and all the fun we were having and everything that went into it. Not an illegal play, nothing dirty going on. The guy just rolled up on his ankle at the very end, and that's really sad. But, you know, they've got a lot of pieces, and that running back that they drafted from Iowa State the year before, he's the real deal, John. His speed is uncanny. I mean, they're a fun team to watch.
Well, and let me throw this out, Pete. So Zach Wilson, I looked up his stats at BYU because he's a BYU quarterback. Number one, you're a BYU quarterback, you know the passing game.
Yeah.
So you don't have to teach the passing game. And there have been a lot of good ones to come out of there, you know, from the punky QB in Chicago, who didn't exactly put up Steve Young kind of numbers, but nonetheless was a very good quarterback. And like I say, they put out a lot of good quarterbacks. This kid, Pete, 15 interceptions, 56 touchdowns in 3 seasons. So he started as a freshman, sophomore, junior, and then he comes out to the NFL. This kid looks like he could, you know, really play the game for them, Pete. And, you know, my heart goes out to Rodgers, which, you know, because he's a friend of yours and mine. We have pictures on the sidelines and after games with him and things like that.
At Cal.
At Cal. And I bet our buddy Joe Rogan gets him down there to Panama to get a bunch of freaking stem cells shot into that damn tendon, Pete.
Yep.
But it's a real sad ending, way too quick to the season. We'll see if it's the end of his career. But I think that Zach Wilson's the real deal, Pete. I think just like Purdy, a lot of people kind of wrote off both of them. Purdy because he was Mr. Insignificant, and Zach Wilson because he didn't immediately just, light up New York, but he's good and he's going to play. And right now they're 1-0. So Salah's got a pretty good start.
Yeah, they got that defense, which doesn't hurt. They got some talent on offense, big offensive line, a lot of good tight ends, I think, some good wide receivers for sure as well. So they've got a lot of the things that they need, John, that'll help him out as well. I keep hearing everybody saying, well, maybe they ought to get Tom Brady. And I'm thinking, good God, the guy's 45 years old. And how in hell are you going to be able to fit that on your, in the cap, And then they're talking about some of the other guys, there's like 4 or 5 old timers that they're bringing up. And it's like, look, to your point, John, I think Zach Wilson could do it. I don't think he's a complete hack. I think he's actually pretty good. He was young, and the NFL is different than college. And some guys don't immediately just react perfectly. And I think this kid underneath Rodgers during this camp and everything else probably has learned a lot. And I think he's got a shot. To your point, it ain't like he's afraid to throw touchdowns, because that guy can throw touchdowns. He might throw a pick here or there, but he throws a hell of a lot of touchdowns.
Yep, I agree. It's going to be an interesting season. And right now, Pete, I'd still say that you're right. Jets #1 defense, and New Orleans pretty damn stout as well on their defensive front. All right. Thanks for joining us, folks. Thanks to Tom Gronkowski for getting this one up there. We truly appreciate it, Gronk. And we will be back tomorrow, folks, at 1 p.m. Eastern time with another Rebels Edge.
Gronk.